Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sara, an autism and eating disorder recovery coach that's on a mission to help neurodivergent individuals and their loved ones turn their mess into their message. Today, I am joined by Julia Trehane, an eating disorder recovery coach who has herself recovered from over 40 years of anorexia, orthorexia, and exercise addiction. She is now on a mission to use her own experience, research, and knowledge to help others who are wanting to recover but struggling to do so. Julia is qualified in multiple coaching modalities, but most importantly, uses a deeply supportive and loving nature to guide and support her clients to find freedom from restriction. Welcome, Julia, to the Live Label Free podcast. How has your day been across the pond today?
Hey Liv, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat to you. And my day's been pretty good. I've just come back from walking the dogs by the river and it was beautiful. So thank you
Oh,
for asking. How was your day?
that's lovely. Yeah, it's I think yesterday or today has definitely been, the first sign of fall is approaching in the Netherlands, which always makes me kind of sad because I like the warm weather and I like wearing shorts, t-shirts. But as we were discussing before we started recording, I have been hopping around and traveling, and I don't know where my next destination is. But I mean, all that aside, I have been looking forward the whole day to speaking with you because despite the moving and the unpredictability and everything changing and the world at large, the one constant, that I'm always, always grateful for is this work. It's this community, it's contributing to this community, being part of, so many loving, compassionate, supportive individuals as yourself. So yeah, I do like to always start off with, kind of getting the backstory of where did you start and what brought you to where you are today? So, can you kind of share what was the childhood like of little Julia? And when did, I like to say, I don't even like to say eating disorder behaviors, but when did the start of what would become an eating disorder, when did that kind of start?
Goodness. I guess my story probably has lots of similarities to lots of other people.
Mm-hmm.
I was the youngest child
Oh,
to parents who I think they did their best with their own conditioning, their own stories, and what they had to give. But I was quite a sensitive child. My dad was a man who was very traditional,
mm-hmm.
very British, stiff upper lip. Emotions were absolutely not acceptable in any way, shape,
Okay.
or form.
Wow. Yeah.
And my mum was, my mum was a complicated character, but she lived for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was her world and I made her happy,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't know at the time, but that was a huge responsibility for a little girl. And so I kind of learnt from a very young age that that was my job, to make her happy, to
Uh-huh.
be whatever she needed me to be, which didn't really involve being a little girl. It involved soothing her, dealing with her emotions, and listening to her and being her best friend, which I did very well, actually.
Yeah.
And she used to praise me hugely and tell me I was her rock and I was got her through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And because my dad was so emotionless,
Mm-hmm.
she kind of relied on me for all of
Right.
that sort of side of things. I learnt very young that crying got me into lots of trouble. Being angry got me into lots of trouble. And that life was a lot simpler and quieter and easier if I was out of the way and I was not seen. And in my child brain, that meant staying really small.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to put together in my head that staying small meant eating less.
Yeah.
And So I started probably by about the age of 8. I was deliberately eating less to try and be small,
Hmm.
to try and not be seen and not get in trouble. And as this progressed, there was an added benefit at the time to me of restricting your food restricts your emotions.
Yes.
And so those emotions that I used to get in lots of trouble for, I didn't have to feel them anymore. So
Yes.
it felt like a superpower. It felt like I was doing something amazing, that I could live this life, be everything my mum needed me to be, do everything I could to please her, and not get in trouble for having these emotions, and stay small and keep out of the way.
Like best of triple worlds.
It was amazing. It was literally
Yeah.
the best thing in my eyes at the time. And I was really good at it.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Yeah.
When we like get in that flow, we're like, aren't we good at this? Yes.
And I started getting lots of validation for it as well.
Hmm.
And as I became a teenager and stuff, and girls' friends were starting to comment on their bodies and stuff, I got validated all the time. So I was just like, in my eyes, winning over and over and over again, doing incredibly well, and not getting into trouble. And the eating disorder was my best friend. It
Yes.
served all my needs.
Hmm.
And of course, if something's helping you feel that good, you're going to really keep going and keep going and keep going.
Totally. Yeah, and ignore anyone who says this is an illness or a
Yeah,
disease. And I think that's a lot of the time, eating disorders are very pathologized in the sense that, the sufferer doesn't see how sick they truly are. But I think the irony of that is that most of the time, at least in my experience personally, and a lot of my clients, we are very well aware that what we're doing is not healthy in like a medical sense. But the benefits of the results, the positive impact that this quote unquote eating disorder has in our life as a whole, it outweighs, no pun intended, the medical dangers that we know are dangers in a lot of ways.
absolutely. And it almost helps you in that as well, in that because I had started to get some comments of being, quote, too thin,
Hmm.
I started to wear more clothes. But of
Hmm.
course, having anorexia makes you incredibly cold. So
Yeah.
it helped that I could wear all these layers of clothes and bulk myself up with the clothing because I was so cold anyway. So I didn't overheat with all these clothes on.
Yeah.
And I got away with it in my terms
Yeah.
then for quite a few years before at school, a particularly strict new PE teacher
Hmm.
would not let me wear my tracksuit for PE. And I had to put on like those awful, I don't, I, you're so young, bless you. We used to have these awful gym knicker things that we used to have to wear with a t-shirt. They were like massive pants, shiny blue with a lurid yellow stripe down the side. They were vile.
I've seen those in the movies. Like I feel like the movie that's coming up in my mind is like The Breakfast Club. I feel like they wear those.
They were the most awful things. They were just like big, shiny nylon pants
Yep. Like the
that you wore.
basketball shorts, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they were very much knickers, just
Okay.
big knickers. And you wore them over your knickers and a t-shirt. And
Hmm.
the girls didn't get to wear shorts. We just had to wear these awful gym knickers. And so this teacher was like, "You are not wearing a tracksuit. You have to wear what everyone else is wearing."
Right.
And however much I begged and pleaded, I was made to put on these awful gym knickers, which were far too big for me.
Of course.
And this t-shirt and come out, and it was obvious then. It was so obvious that I was really not well. And so my parents got phoned, and can I swear in your podcast?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
The shit hit the fan,
Yeah.
and my parents were called, and I got in loads of trouble.
Hmm.
It was, I think it was taken that I was doing this really deliberately.
Yeah,
and
usually
rather
it
than
is.
it being
Yeah.
an illness. And part of it, I suppose, was deliberate because it was helping me in my eyes at the time. But it also wasn't deliberate because I really couldn't at the time do
Yes.
anything else. Felt
This
like the only way of getting by.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
didn't
this
see
word
an
deliberate you're
alternative.
using is really interesting because I think a lot of the time, so when we're talking about eating disorders and the role they have and the purpose they serve, I think we get really almost we we lack semantics almost. We lack the proper semantics because, traditionally. And I mean, I believed this for many years. There was this that, the eating disorder was about control. Like, I mean, I even started saying, it's not about being thin, it's not about the way I look, it's about control. And as I started, once I recovered and as I started working with more people in eating disorder recovery, especially people on the spectrum, especially neurodivergent people, I started really questioning this word control more and more and more. And I feel like it's much more appropriate to say they're not about control, but eating disorders are about safety. But again, it's almost a two-sided coin because to get this sense of safety, you have to make deliberate choices to control your environment, to control your circumstances. And then it's like, is control the wrong word here? And then I'm almost thinking like, yeah, I was in a way manipulating my body. I was manipulating my nervous system. I was manipulating my sense of safety. And then, in treatment, I was often called the manipulative patient, but I was like, I wasn't actually manipulating anything. Because a lot of it is subconscious. So then the question is like, are you really deliberately making the choice to do this? Or is it almost like a primitive adaptive response to the lack of safety you feel in your environment? And I think what's most important, because obviously this semantic hole I'm digging myself in as I speak. You know, I think it's important to give ourselves compassion in the language we use and almost stay humble and open to, if someone else has a preference for saying it or phrasing it in a certain way, respect their choices and just say, like, I like to say it this way, you like to say it that way. Kind of like with neurodivergence and autism, what comes to mind is, a lot of people like to say, I am autistic because it's their identity. Whereas there are people who prefer to say, I have autism. And there's no right or wrong way to say it. It's just about what do you prefer? What's your preference? So I know I kind of went into a pathway here on that
Yeah.
word deliberate, but this was kind of my heart was like calling me to say this because I think it is important to just for people to know that, the words we use don't always fully encompass exactly what we're trying to say. And I think that's where the lived experience is so, so important because I'm sure
Yes,
as you resonate a lot of times with clients, they don't even need to say exactly how they feel for us to just get it.
absolutely. And as an adult, I look back and I can say this wasn't a conscious, deliberate action. However, it was a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
It was my way of getting through the world when I knew no other.
Yes.
And so, but it was treated by my parents, my teachers, as a deliberate action.
Yeah.
Um, Back then, there wasn't really a lot in the way of treatment available, not where I was anyway.
Mhm.
And so it was a case of being sat at the table and being shouted at until I finished my food.
That
Over
was
and over.
kind of my experience too, honestly, with I'm sure you're familiar with FBT, family-based therapy. That
Yeah,
was, parents had to take over all the meals. The child is basically incompetent because they're sick and they don't know what they're doing. And it just shocks me that they still continue with this modality, not realizing, that the shouting at the kid, asking them, forcing them to eat is actually just making it more likely for them to use their coping mechanism to feel safe.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I did, I don't want to say recover, I weight restored
Yes, very different things.
under the fear. And shortly after that, my parents went through a pretty messy divorce. My mum left to live overseas, and my dad uh, basically kicked me out. it was a huge big row, and I left home at 15.
Wow, that's young.
It is young, isn't it? And so actually, bizarrely, everything was much better with the
Hmm.
eating disorder
Yeah.
once I had left home. And although I still had so many rules and restrictions and habits that I had to stick to feel safe, to cope, I was sort of nourishing my body.
Hmm.
So I wasn't at that really terrible place.
Yeah.
I met my husband to be when I was 18, and
Also young.
so young, yes. And we got married when I was 21.
Okay.
I still had so many rules and stuff about food, but he had no idea I had an eating disorder.
Right.
He just thought I was a bit odd, I think, really.
Just being obsessive, probably.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And things went on just kind of like ticked along. I was living with all these rules, but getting on sort of okay. I was
Mhm.
existing and coping, kind of like a functioning alcoholic, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah.
And I had my first baby when I was 24, 23, 24, something like that.
Wow, my age.
I can't believe you're like only a year older than my youngest son. And then he had an allergy, anaphylaxis, which is where
Uh-huh.
his throat closed up and
Yeah.
everything, to egg. And I became, I was a very, very dedicated mum.
Hmm.
I tried to do everything perfectly. I had huge issues with perfectionism. And when he was diagnosed with this anaphylaxis, it was a terrifying time. He was very, very sick.
Hmm.
I then was on a mission to eliminate egg from our house, our
Yeah.
surroundings, everything. So I started to make every single thing from scratch. I had to think about what went in everything. And this then morphed into a really orthorexic mindset where
Yeah.
everything had to be organic, everything had to be pure and clean. And it just was the start of another really, really obsessive time of my life. And that continued and for decades actually.
Hmm.
And I had a second child. And after I had him, I was getting really stressed about my body as well, having
Hmm.
had two children. And my body was just a perfectly ordinary body on the small side, but
Hmm.
not anything to be concerned about in any way.
Right.
And I just started getting all these obsessive thoughts. I was still very orthorexic. And so then I started to do a lot of exercise.
Hmm.
I joined a group called Weigh In and Workout.
Oh gosh. I'm like, we don't even need to elaborate on this name.
I know, right? And so then, of course, I was weighing in and working out multiple times a day.
Hmm.
And this just continued. So there was the orthorexia, there was all the food restrictions anyway that had always been there. Then the exercise came in. And honestly, it was like living in Groundhog Day,
Yeah.
day after day, week after week, year after year,
Yes.
until COVID.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're talking, that was a good 30 years, 35 years of
Yeah.
this grind, this existence. I was very, very much a people pleaser. I hated myself,
Hmm.
absolutely hated myself, never thought I was good enough in any way.
Hmm.
I had friends, but I didn't believe they really liked me. I thought they were just being polite.
Yeah.
I was quite, I suppose, quite paranoid. I had a lot of obsessive rules outside of food, like I had to count every step I took.
Yeah.
TV had to be, the volume had to be on a multiple of 2 or 5. I have no idea why.
Sounds like autistic traits.
Definitely. And In COVID, my dad died,
Hmm.
and all of those emotions that I hadn't felt hadn't gone anywhere. They
Right.
were all still inside and they started to swirl and things were coming up.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, I don't know how to feel these. I don't know what to do. And I felt like I was going mad. I had no
Yes.
idea how to process emotions. So I went to my old friend of restriction because that worked. So I
Mm.
started to restrict more. I mean, I was already quite restrictive and orthorexic and
Hmm.
doing ridiculous amounts of exercise.
Yeah.
But I started to restrict more and exercise more, and then more, and then more. And the thoughts wouldn't stop coming, the feelings wouldn't stop coming up. And I got to the point where I was exercising for a minimum of 8 hours every day, 7 days a week, and eating not enough to keep a newborn baby going. I'm not going to go into numbers because that could be
No,
tricky
but
for
it's
people, but
also not necessary.
no. But I got kicked out of my gym because I kept passing out. I was being found by dog walkers when I was walking my dogs passed out. And I couldn't cope. And I realized that what I thought I was in control of was controlling me. And I didn't know what to do.
Hmm.
I literally, my brain capacity at this point must have been virtually non-existent. It was just a whole mass of fear of anxiety. And I had no idea how to carry on. Nothing I was doing was helping. And so I basically hit rock bottom and I just decided that I was going to end my life. And I didn't know a way forward. And so I got everything together. I wrote notes for my family, for my children. And I mentioned earlier my son had anaphylaxis.
Yeah.
I also have anaphylaxis, but to gin randomly. So
Oh,
it's quite easy to avoid.
yes.
So I bought a bottle of gin and I took it up into the woods. I don't know why. I just didn't want my family to find me, I suppose. I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking very clearly at all. And I opened the bottle, and in my head, suddenly I heard incredibly angry voices of my sons. And they were, what the fuck do you think you're doing, mum? How fucking dare you? Now,
Mm.
they weren't allowed to swear, so this was like really strong from
Yeah.
coming from them. And I know it was all in my head, and I knew it was in my head at the time. But they were saying that you can't leave us with this legacy. This is the most selfish and cruel thing you can ever do to us.
Yeah.
If you love us, you will stop this right now. And so I did. And I'm so grateful that that came into my head. And I called one of my friends who came and got me, and they literally were on the phone finding me a therapist to take me to there and then.
Hmm.
And they found someone who was dreadful, actually. But it was a step. It was the first time I'd ever asked for help, and it was a step. And then that therapist was like, whoa, I can't help you. I have no idea about eating disorders.
Yeah.
And then I found another therapist. I was still trying to hide it all from my family because it was my husband's a blueberry farmer and it was blueberry season at the time. So he was virtually not in at all,
Hmm.
the middle of the harvest season. And he came home one day, and that mask that I was putting on at the end of the day to pretend everything was okay, I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't have the
Yeah.
energy, I didn't have the capacity to do it. And I just broke down. And I think I just cried and I just said, no, I hadn't cried for about 40 years. And so he was really shocked. And I just said, I need to tell you something, but you can't fix me. And I don't know, I think because he just likes to fix things. And I think I was so adamant, I'm not going to tell you if you're going to try and fix me.
Yeah. Well, because you knew in your heart that he couldn't. You
Yeah,
knew that you had to fix or heal yourself.
yes. And so I told him, and he was devastated, shocked, hurt that I'd hidden it for so long, and horrified at how underweight I was.
Hmm.
because I'd been pushing him away for a long time and he hadn't seen me for a long time.
Hmm.
And so he booked us a holiday, which I don't remember much of. I was in such a bad state.
Yeah.
But it was probably helpful to take me away from reality for a little while. And when I was on that holiday, I read so many books on anorexia recovery.
Hmm.
Um, I read, like, I listened to so many podcasts, watched so many YouTube videos. And when I came back, I was ready to actually go to my doctor
Hmm.
and ask, which was a fairly pointless exercise, if I'm honest. The waiting lists here are, at that point, they were 2.5 years long.
Yeah, not just where you are. I mean, it's the same here in the Netherlands and in the US. I don't know if it's as much waiting lists, but more of will your insurance cover the 2,000
Yes.
pound a day treatment? And if not, you have to pay out of pocket. Oh, too bad for you. Yeah, and I think, again, this is where just the power of coaches like you and I. And I know that you had a coach as well, which is a dear friend of ours. I think that's, where we come in to be such a powerful resource because not only do we have that lived experience, but we actually we actually give a fuck. And I think the
Yes.
reason why there are these waiting lists is because so many of these doctors and people in this system don't actually understand and don't understand the urgency of treatment and of getting better and getting someone to listen to you and help you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the NHS wasn't really going to be helping. And I reached out to the author of one of the books that I'd written, who was a recovery coach. And I worked with her for a couple of months.
Hmm.
And she did help me a lot with actually starting to eat.
Hmm.
It had to be done very gradually to begin with because I was at pretty high risk of refeeding syndrome at the
Gotcha.
time. But she helped me through that. But the mindset was still very, very much there. The fear was still there. And I was really struggling. And I
Hmm.
just knew that carrying on with that wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then I heard Victoria, our friend,
Yes. Who
on a
I'm seeing on
podcast.
Thursday.
Exciting. I'm
Yeah.
very jealous of you.
Well, one day we'll have to do a trio meetup.
Definitely. Yeah, that would be wonderful. And Victoria was talking about self love, and I was only familiar with self loathing.
Yeah.
And it sounded incredible. It sounded amazing. And she talked about a codependent relationship with her mum. And that one sentence just resonated so much with me.
Yes. I mean, if I may interrupt, actually, Victoria has been on my podcast on the Live Label Free, and she was telling me her story. And as you were telling your story, I was like, damn, this reminds me so much of Victoria's story. That, that idea of being best friends with your mom.
Yeah,
'Cause, and also it developing at like age 8. I was like, wow, like no wonder she and you were such a good fit for coaching because I think this is where, it is so important to find a coach that you resonate with on a very deep level because there are so many amazing coaches, but the relationship is, going to be unique based on your experience.
absolutely.
Like
Yes,
that's why people who are neurodivergent may not resonate with a coach, who doesn't have awareness of that piece or a lived experience of that piece. And I think when it comes to Victoria and you and that codependency and that self-loathing and transitioning to that into self-love, it's so, so important that you are almost on the same wavelength of understanding in that arena. And when you mention your other coach that, helped you to eat and helped you make some steps, it sounds like, she didn't understand the root of where the behaviors were coming from. And if you don't address the root, well, you're only, putting a band-aid on the symptoms. And we know that doesn't
absolutely.
work.
No, it doesn't. That it doesn't at all. You can't fully recover without sorting out the cause without
Yes.
healing your inner child and without
Yeah.
bringing in, I personally believe, love and compassion.
Yes. Me too.
And that changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
That starting to become aware of how I treated myself, of how I spoke to myself, because I don't think I was even particularly aware of it. It was just the way it was.
Oh,
I never really
totally.
questioned it. And I actually thought that most people spoke to themselves like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was such a breath of fresh air to find out that they didn't, that we don't actually have to be a total bitch to ourselves. We don't
Yeah.
have to put ourselves down all the time. And slowly working with Victoria and working on self love and self compassion and inner child work, things started to feel different as I took actions. Obviously, actions come before feelings change.
Yes.
You can't change your
That's an
feelings
important
without
one.
the actions.
Yeah, yeah, that's something I talk about a lot. I think especially with my neurodivergent clients, we really look at, what are these beliefs, what are the stories you're telling yourself about
Yeah,
X, Y, Z. And one of the beliefs that is almost universal among the clients I've worked with is this belief that, being autistic, being neurodivergent is going to make recovery exponentially harder because the traits often overlap so closely. And, for your brain to start believing, actually, I can use my need for structure and predictability and routine. I can actually use that to help me in recovery. When we flip that around, kind of like your
absolutely.
work you've done with like, can we start flipping the way we talk to ourselves from a place of fear and lack and just awfulness to love and abundance and kindness, that's when the work happens. But to get those thoughts and to actually start believing those thoughts, we need to repeatedly take action. And so I love that you say that, and also in terms of, just like recovery actions like reducing exercise and eating more and making peace with weight gain, it's not, okay, I'm going to accept weight gain and then I'm going to gain weight. It's like your brain trusts situations that you put it through. It's like you can only accept weight gain if you give your brain the experience of knowing what it feels like to gain weight. It's not easy. It doesn't mean it's easy, but that is the way our mind works. So I love that you're touching on this point.
Yeah, yeah, it's so much. And I learnt, first of all, I learnt to be aware of the stories I was telling myself.
Yes.
And then I learnt that what I'd been doing was reacting from a place of fear. Instead, I started to respond from a place of love,
Yes.
and everything changed. And my life became, it was night and day. It would gone from this existence in black and white prison, Groundhog Day, of everything just being got through
Yeah.
until that day ended. And then the next day would start, and you had to get through it again, to waking up in a coloured world, a world of light and colour and rainbows and
Reminding
just
me of my book name.
just to feel excited for what was to come, to be excited to have another day.
Yeah.
And I was so blown away, and it still blows my mind every day, actually,
Mm-hmm.
how different life is
Yeah.
when you're nourished
Yes.
and when you're loving towards yourself and you
Yes.
don't sacrifice yourself to please others all the time.
Right.
When you actually meet your own needs, life is unrecognizably different.
Yeah.
And I was so excited by it, so passionate about it, and so blown away by it that I was like, everyone has to feel this.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to experience this. I never believed I would be able to recover. I'd
Yep.
been in it too long. I was too old. I was 48 when I started recovery. So I'd been in it 40 years. I just thought it was the way it was. I didn't think anything could get better. I was too old. People who were recovering from anorexia were in their teens.
Yeah.
Why would anyone help me? And I thought I had to do everything myself. I didn't know that it's actually a strength to ask for help. I thought that was a weakness.
Hmm. Yeah, because you had been conditioned as a child.
Absolutely. And so I was just like, I want to help other people feel like this. I want to shout this from the rooftops. I want to spread this message that there is a life and it's fucking beautiful
Yeah.
outside of an eating disorder. And then that became my mission, to try and share with other people, to bring hope to other people. And now I coach other people and celebrate every step of their journeys with them. And it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life.
It is. I definitely resonate a lot with the ending. Not the ending of your story, but what
Just
you
the
just
beginning,
what you just
right?
said about, how you really had to recondition your brain to learn, like, I'm not too old, I'm not too this, I'm not beyond hope. And you did that through proving to your brain that you weren't beyond hope. You proved to your brain by taking the hard actions that you are capable. And this word fulfillment that you use is just really hitting me in my core, because that's exactly how I would describe this work, having a podcast, working with people, helping people, waking up in the morning actually fucking excited for what you're going to do. Kind of ties back to the emotions we were talking about. Is an eating disorder numbs you from the sadness, but also from the happiness, from the excitement.
Yes.
I was not thrilled by anything anymore except for going to the supermarket. That was the only thing that made me excited. I would go there like it was some sort of museum. And obviously, the mental hunger, constantly thinking about food, planning every single thing you're going to have. When I was doing that and when I was eating, like, those were the highlights of my life. Like, that was when I would just get this, like, little sense of euphoria, and then it would be over. And then again, Groundhog Day, all over again. And kind of going back to that rock bottom moment you described, of like, I can't fucking do this. Like, it's either death or I'm going to climb myself out of this. That resonates with me a lot too, because my brain capacity was pretty much non-functional too when, you're exercising and restricting the whole day, and that's your sole purpose in life, pretty much,
Yeah.
is just surviving. And ironically, making the survival very difficult, like that's your mechanism to survive. And I was having panic attacks every single day. Like, I would, because I was still living at home, so I would like test my mom, like how much she loved me. And I would say, if you truly love me, you know exactly how many grams of oatmeal I need to eat right now. And then I would make up new numbers in my head. So obviously she would get it wrong. And then I'd say, proof that you don't love me. And then I would run away. And obviously I was like a frail little skeleton. So I would, either collapse or just break down. And there was one night where I said, I can't fucking do this anymore. And that was for me, the start, the upward climb. Again, it was not easy. It was filled with therapists who didn't understand and who said, I just had to learn to cope with my emotions. And I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. And that was, something really challenging for me in recovery, was feeling these highs and lows in a way that I had not felt for as long as I could remember. That was pretty terrifying to me. And at the same time, it was like a release, kind of like you described when your father passed away, of like all these emotions that had been bottled up in a way. They had to be released, they had to be let out. And that is what allows us to, pun intended right now, fly to freedom, is, letting that energy go where it wants to go. And I think for us, that energy now that we first channeled into the eating disorder, channeled into self-loathing and restriction and fear, we now channel that into contribution. And that's why I love this phrase, turning your mess into your message. Because I think more than anything, recovery from an eating disorder isn't merely about recovering from an eating disorder. It's about turning your struggles, turning your traumas and triumphs into something that can actually benefit beyond yourself. Because I'm never going to claim what the purpose is of life, but I think innately, I do believe that my purpose, at least, and your purpose clearly, and the purpose of people who are good in this world is to leave a bit of our good beyond ourselves. I think
Absolutely.
that would, if all of us committed to doing that, we wouldn't have world wars, but that's another story.
Yeah, I think it is to do that by giving ourselves love,
Yes.
first of all,
Hmm.
so that then we have so much that we can give. And I used to give from an empty cup all
Yep.
the time.
Yeah.
And I could give nowhere near what I do now.
Totally.
And I was exhausted. And now I'm just like permanently excited. So it's recovery. I think I know a lot of people have this thought that you can't ever fully recover.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
yeah.
I disagree.
Oh, same. I mean, and I think it's kind of back to that word control. Like we've been conditioned by quote unquote healthcare professionals that this is something you're just going to have to manage forever. And I mean, even, this idea of, how long you've had the eating disorder and your age, it really bothers me when people say early intervention is the key. Like the earlier you get to the eating disorder, the earlier you treat it, the more likely it is that they're going to recover. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. What matters is that the individual themselves is actually willing to create a better life. Like that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my response to the you can't fully recover ever is that if you are literally just focusing on the symptoms of the eating disorder, on the food and on the exercise, that is probably true.
Yeah, because that's not how it works.
No, but recovery turns into discovery when you start to get to know yourself, to become aware of yourself, and to meet your needs. And the discovery never ends. I learn new things about myself every time fear comes up.
I
And
love
it's
that you use that word
exciting.
discovery because that's the last chapter of my How to Beat Extreme Hunger book.
A very good book as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that when we start to become aware, particularly of the stories we tell ourselves and the conditioning and the beliefs we have,
Hmm.
and where did they even come from?
Yeah.
Were they ever ours in the first place? Or are they just inherited? And when we start to ask questions about things and really get to know ourselves and find out what makes us feel good, what makes us feel happy,
Hmm.
then we get to really step into our power and really become incredible human beings who have such a gift to give the world because we've given that gift to ourselves, first of all.
Yes, yes, what you just said about, asking questions and really questioning, where did these beliefs come from? Are they even ours in the first place? I love that. And it reminds me of a mantra that I often use myself and use in coaching is this idea of, how can we come from a place of curiosity rather than judgment? Because I think so much of the time, even these labels, these beliefs of, I can never recover, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve XYZ. This is judgment. But when we ask ourselves, well, what do we want? Why do we want it? What are my core beliefs? What are my values? That's being curious. And when we are curious, well, that's the only way to discover. Have you ever met someone, or have you ever known someone who did a wonderful scientific discovery like physics or gravity or Newton and, these guys? Like my brain is going in so many directions right now. But the people who find out these wonderful things that our society now like cannot under like could not exist without this knowledge
Yeah,
almost, They did not discover these things by deciding ahead of time, I'm a failure. Like this is never gonna work out. No,
Yeah.
they stayed open. And when we have an open mindset and we continue to ask ourselves questions and we also acknowledge that we never have everything fully figured out, I think that's when you can retain that sense of excitement. Because the only reason little kids are excited to go anywhere is like because it's gonna be a new experience or it's gonna
Yes.
be fun. But if you tell a little kid to like go stare at a wall and be like, be excited right now. It's like that. Okay, I don't know where I'm going with this, man. But I think when we again like label things and think that we already have it all figured out and don't open ourselves up to having new experiences, that's when we fall into this like possibility that we're probably judging the situation or labeling it as good or bad or something we should or should not deserve. And that deserve word, I'm like, that's another one that comes up a lot of the time in eating disorder recovery. It's like, I
Yes.
don't deserve recovery. And then they have all these reasons. And one of the reasons is a lot of the time, when I'm working with people who have extreme hunger, is like, I don't deserve extreme hunger because my restriction wasn't severe enough. I was always eating meals and snacks. I wasn't ever like only eating a carrot stick per day, blah, blah, blah. But it's like your eating disorder will always convince you of why you're not sick enough, of why you don't deserve it. Your limited self will always convince you. But then it's again about being curious, do I want my limited self to run the show, or do I want my true, abundant, energetically infinite self to decide? And that is tied to love, because we as humans, our energy is pure love.
100%. Yes. So much.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up. I do want to ask because I think you are this lived experience expert, who has recovered from like way longer than I've even been alive eating disorders.
Way to
What?
make me feel old.
Well, I mean, in a positive way,
No,
because
it's
this
all
is,
good.
your unique message that you can give to people that I can't give them, because I can't say I'm recovered from 40 years. But I do get a lot of emails from people who are like, I've had this for 30 years, 40 years. I had a client who's 65. And, you know, I think it's so important that they hear that it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 180. If you are committed and you want to get better and you want freedom, where there is a will, there is a way. So, what advice would you give to anyone listening who maybe holds this belief of, I'm too old, I've been struggling too long?
First of all, you are not alone at all. I was so surprised to discover how common it is for people to have been living in this restriction in an eating disorder for decades
Hmm.
and just think, well, this is the way it is now. It's surprisingly common. So, first of all, you're not alone at all. It is never, ever too late. I mean, if I can feel like, I feel like since I've recovered, I have lived more life than in the previous 48 years of my life. And that, even if I were to die tomorrow, that's made everything worth it
Yeah,
because it's been so incredible. And I have so much appreciation for life now because I existed for so long without living it.
yes,
So you can recover at any age. And actually, in some ways, age is an advantage. And particularly when you're coming up to like menopausal age and stuff like that, because you give less fucks what people think then.
yeah,
It takes work, that takes sorting your mindset out.
yeah,
But biology and hormones help.
yeah,
They help you to be able to reframe that. So that's actually an advantage.
yeah.
Doesn't mean it's not possible before, of course, it's possible.
Yes, I can attest to that.
But it's worth it, even if you are you've lived in it for so long that you think you only have a few years left of life. As I said, I've had 2 years fully recovered, and they've been the best 2 years of my life, and I feel like I have lived.
Mhm.
And that's been worth every second. So it is worth it. It's not too late. Everything can change. And when you've been living in it for so long, you're more done than someone that hasn't been living it for so long. The honeymoon period was over decades ago, and you've just been existing. The eating disorder is not doing anything for you anymore. So it's time to step into your own power. And oh my goodness, what a power it is. It's incredible. So reach out, put you first. Stop putting everybody else first. Stop sacrificing yourself. It's your turn and it's your time, and you can do this.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Anyone listening, this is your sign. This is your sign to put you first. So, Julia, where can people find you? Get in touch, learn more about your wonderful coaching and content and podcast. Yeah, just drop it all for our listeners.
Okay, thank you for asking. So, yeah, I have a podcast which Liv's actually been on, haven't you? Called Flight of Freedom. And that's available on everywhere that podcasts are and on YouTube. And my website, which is juliatrehane.com,
Just
which
been updated,
it
right?
has been
I
updated.
had a look. It looks beautiful.
Got lots and lots of blog posts on it now. Quite honestly, confession, right? It's been updated because my husband has got I'm absolutely hopeless at tech and honestly, really hopeless at it. And also don't enjoy it. It's not where my skills lie, and I don't have enough interest in it to get good at it.
Right, right.
And he's brilliant at it. And so he's taken me in hand. He's sorted out all my website. He's getting everything on there for me. He's doing all the technical side of a new course that's coming out soon
Oh, that's
on
exciting.
managing navigating. I haven't got the title yet.
That's okay.
Basically, fear of weight gain,
Hmm.
which everyone has, right?
Yeah.
And he's also helping me with emails. And we now have this absolutely beautiful daily love email mantra that goes out every morning to people to help them through their day. And I'm getting such incredible feedback. So you can sign up to that on my website. That's all free.
Oh, I'm gonna sign up for Daily Love emails.
Yeah, do
Thank you.
it. It's wonderful. It really is. And it just starts your day off with love.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And I'm also on Instagram, which is at Julia Trehane. So I'm like everywhere now. It's
Yeah,
quite, for
you
somebody
are.
that was nowhere, that I wouldn't even go on social media, I wouldn't speak because I didn't like my voice. And I
Yeah.
didn't think I had anything to say that anybody would want to hear. And I'm now just, my voice is everywhere. And
That's
I'm
so
everywhere.
that's so funny you mentioned that about the voice because one of the I don't know if you notice it on YouTube, but out of all the platforms, people are often the meanest on YouTube. And I get such nasty comments on there, and they're always making fun of my voice because I have a bit of a, I don't know if you'd call it a lisp, but I have trouble with my S's. So I don't know if it's just like an autistic speech thing, but people are always making mean comments about it. And I have an
Wow.
assistant who helps with the podcast, and he always says, the amount of YouTube comments I delete is no joke. And I'm laughing so hard right now because I can so clearly see that the people who are commenting this are not coming from a place of love. They're coming from a place
Mm.
of anger and judgment, probably just projection in their own lives. And I think that is another thing that you gain when you start like looking through like love tinted glasses is that you can really so much better able to set boundaries, and also you stop taking everything so fucking personally. Like
Yes.
now when I get a comment that's like they type it like welcome to live label free but then with a W. So it's like welcome to live label free as if I talk like that. I'm like this is just so hilarious that you have the time to comment that. And anyways, kind of a side comment, but yeah, I think the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because you just become so much more confident in your own abilities rather than letting your emotions depend on what other people are doing, and that is freedom.
Absolutely. if somebody doesn't like me, and if somebody doesn't want to listen to my voice, and if somebody doesn't want to see me on Instagram, don't. That's okay. You're
Right.
not my
Then
person.
go the other way. I don't
Yeah,
care.
you're not my person, and I'm good with that.
Yeah,
I'm absolutely fine. We all find our people,
we
and
do.
the people that genuinely are my people are not going to care what size body I'm in now. They're not going to care what my voice sounds like. They're not going to care that I'm 50 and that I have
Mhm.
wrinkles. None of that. It doesn't matter. I don't care. So I don't care what anybody else thinks anymore.
Yeah,
Because I know now from this girl that hated herself, I'm a really good person and I love who I am and I love my life.
yeah.
And that's available for everyone.
Yes, and it's possible. And again, if you're listening to this, it's because you know in your heart that this is possible for you too.
If
Otherwise, you would have given up already. Let's be real.
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, you want better,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be listening. And
Yes.
that's the part that's coming from love.
Yes. Absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your wisdom. It's been a true pleasure. And everyone listening, thank you. And Julia and I will talk to you both in our own podcasts. Bye bye for now.
Bye and thank you.